one down at Syracuse. When they
Did
the airport down there. They put
You can't shut your camera off or mute your mic now, guys.
Everybody had to get dressed today, it's nice.
Yeah, it's like normal.
When you design an airport, you design it on 3 different runways.
I seen one of those Zoom
The
meetings,
whole water tower.
the guy sitting there with a suit coat and everything, and he gets up and he's got his boxers on, it's like,
layer.
really?
Things forward now.
Oh, I forgot.
You got to cover all 3
Uh,
approaches, whichever way.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'll call the Jefferson County Local Development Corporation meeting to order. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're all in sync today.
Yeah. You talk about input now, when you virtually this morning, play out of Phoenix got delayed, so I was sure they were connecting to like Philly. That was like what I
So
said.
you that got arrested for not wearing a mask?
No.
$10,000 fine.
Then I got to Philly, and then so finally we barely made it. I mean, fortunately they waited for us. Last night of the day, there were actually like 9 of us on that flight. We needed to come to Watertown, but then coming to Watertown, he starts coming down, pulls back up. He goes, well, wait till the pass. Fog's kind of low. Now we'll have to take you to Rochester. But we made it. Second passport.
Did you like it to make it?
Yeah.
Going into Syracuse one time, there was a snowstorm. He comes down and you could see the tops of the houses. And all of a sudden, he just hit the afterburners and took it straight up. He did circles around and says, well, folks, because we're gonna take another pass at that. He says, we kind of missed the runway that time. I'm going, oh, boy. We did our pledge, privilege of the floor. We don't have anyone here. Minutes from our last meeting. We all received them. Is there any additions and or corrections?
Yeah. I move to accept as presented.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Treasurer's report?
Page 5 of your packet, pretty straightforward. So 96,000 a month is break even. We're averaging a little over 100,000 on the revenue side. On the expenses, similar 96,000 a month. Expenses per month is break even. We're only spending about 79,000 per month, so you can see we have about 193,000 surplus right now. 2020 we had 170K surplus. So as the different programs, which are on page 6 and 7 and 8, maybe catch up and spend some additional funds as the summer and the fall goes on. The surplus may dwindle a little bit, but it looks like it still might be a surplus by the end of the year. It's a guesstimate. But so page 6 is our ag program. It's on target to be at or under budget at this point. Page 7 is our, I guess, core budget for operations for businesses and things. Again, we've spent very little. Some of these things will be happening soon, like the safety training and
Yes.
those are things that are planned. It's delayed a little bit.
Well, we've been doing the safety training, but the grant this year was small. By that, usually they award the funds. We would have had the funds back last August. They just awarded the funds this spring. So.
Okay. And then advertising is the last on page 8. Again, it's reasonably on target for at or below budget. Page 9 is your balance sheet. So our quick assets are about 23,000 higher than prior period. Receivables were about 36,000 lower than prior period. Current assets are just over 12,000 lower than prior period. And total liabilities are about 34,000 lower than prior period. Excuse me. Total capitals about 20,000 higher than prior period. Page 10 of your loan packet is just a snapshot of the loan programs. Lyle or Joy, I'm not sure who put this. The only on Clayton Island Tours, it says 30 days, but all the other ones say current, or what does the 30 days mean? It's late by 30? Or,
Yes, late by
okay,
30.
all right, because usually it said delinquent or something, delinquent 1. I just didn't know if that
No,
was
we
the same.
usually put 30 days.
Okay, because all the other ones say delinquent 1, delinquent 2, on the other packet,
He does
JCIDA.
the-
Okay.
He does the
I just wanted to
idea.
understand the nomenclature, that's fine. I didn't want to assume that's what that meant. Okay, so it's 30 days late is what you're inferring, there. And I had a question on LCO Destiny. I guess because this report is as of June 30th, at that point was interest only. Okay, so that's, and it is current.
And
And I know
it's
we,
in this one to approve the.
yeah, no, I know there's some, I didn't remember when the interest only, ended. I thought, okay, so for some reason I had April in my mind and I wasn't sure
Yeah,
if
June
that
was
was
the last
right.
interest only payment.
I couldn't find that, so that, as long as it's current, that's fine. So that's the treasurer's report. I would make a motion to accept it as presented.
For a whole year, something like
There's
that.
a motion and a second.
Second.
I'd have to look. I didn't catch the first and second, sorry.
John had a second. Any questions on the treasurer's report?
Just to expand upon that, so the interest only post-COVID and for everybody with June's payment?
Not everyone, because I think we had some loans that didn't begin until July or, like, there were just a couple though. Most of them, yes.
I'd say by August report, it's back to normal
Yeah.
for everyone, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think the zero.
I think a number of them would have ended in April or May.
Yeah.
The majority, April or May, the majority of them
June
would have
started the
ended.
regular, right. I'd have to look at the difference.
On the motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Loan review, number go.
Loan review.
Save your voice here. We had two considerations during loan review, and there's resolutions on your agenda for both Clayton Yacht Club and LCO Destiny. So we discussed both of those applications. Clayton Yacht Club was a $40,000 loan request to pay for actually completed repairs from 2019, 2020 high water. They made a good presentation. The loan review committee considered it. They checked all of the boxes with regards to contribution of equity, term of loan, interest, duration of loan, and it looked to be a very safe investment under the, let's see, was this micro or revolving loan? I forget now.
Revolving loan.
Revolving loan. It says it on the resolution if I look at it. So all of that, it was approved by loan review committee to be considered by what Dave is now going to ask you to consider formally.
Sure. I have resolution number 0709, 2021.01, resolution for authorizing a revolving loan to Clayton Yacht Club Incorporated. It's a loan in the amount of $40,000. Interest only for 12 months, then 3% for 5 years. I entertain a motion in a second.
Moved. Second.
Discussion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
The second consideration we brought up in loan review was LCO Destiny requested a, I don't know, for lack of a better term, reamortization of their loan to a more manageable monthly payment. And during loan review, we considered a balloon 12 months in the future. That's the resolution, so I can find it. So we discussed in loan review to generate a set of terms and interest that would approximate $2,000 per month payment, and then the balloon would occur a year from now, in July of 2022. And we also put an added contingency that if the building were sold before then, the balloon payment would be made at that point. And that was considered, discussed and considered at loan review, and then put into this resolution that I'll update to read.
Resolution number 0709, 2021.02, the resolution for authorizing a modification to the revolving loan to LCO Destiny LLC. It's a reamortization at $2,000 a month. As Rob said, for the next 12 months with a balloon payment in July of 2022. Entertain a motion in a second for this resolution.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Second.
Discussion.
Quick question.
Sure.
Has LCO Destiny been made aware of the terms of this resolution? What the board is considering? Because this is a little different than what they requested.
It actually is a little different.
But actually, what we'll do, Paul, we'll do an homage to the existing loan documents and get that to Lisa and re-amortize it.
But is she aware of what we're,
I don't know if she is yet.
okay.
It hasn't been approved, so
I'm pretty sure I told her what loan.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Okay.
what loan, yeah.
I had a couple minor comments in it, and I'm not sure they're entirely necessary, but in the third whereas clause, we put the building is sold. I mean, we all agree prior to the balloon payment. I wonder if we should put if the building is sold prior to balloon payment, the loan we're paying full, to be for clarity. And full payment in July, should we put a date, like end of July, like, I'm assuming it's the end of July, not the beginning of July, because July is 30 days. So if you wanna, those are my only two comments, but just for clarity, should we put a date the balloon payment should occur? So it says full payment in July of 2022. I'm just saying,
For
put
July
a date,
30.
put a date, and then the added contingency that if building is sold, I'm suggesting prior to balloon payment, then the loan will be repaid in full. I think that's what we intended, but it's just
I think
clarity.
well, her intent too is, if she sells the building. she would be-
No, I know that, but
But no, that's
we
fine.
might as well write it down, because I'm sure that's what we all intended to mean, but just for clarity, it's easier to write what you mean.
Yeah.
Can you remind me what LCO Destiny?
It's
Time frame, you probably know the time
Yeah,
frame.
time frame, you could, you know,
So those are my, I guess, only two suggested additions, at a date after July, pick a date of the calendar, and prior to the balloon payment between sold and then. If the building is sold prior to the balloon payment, comma then. If no one objects to those, or if there's further discussion.
So
The motion, you want to accept his amendments? You made the motion, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
I thought I seconded, but that's okay.
Oh, you did second, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
He made the motion.
I made the motion?
Yes.
Oh, I did? Yeah, okay.
So your motion is as amended, right?
Yeah, it's as amended.
Sorry.
Hey, come on, this is early. It's Friday.
Alrighty. Any other discussion?
So do I gather that she's looking for a complete change in operations, she's not looking to downsize? She may be selling the building.
she's consolidating, and because they have another building in the back of the park. If you go down to where Henderson Manufacturing, that's swing around the corner to the left, they're consolidating into that one building.
So,
So she's continuing to operate, which is better than,
right,
you know,
change in operations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's good.
On the motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We did talk about sponsorship for the Jefferson County Fair.
You're right.
And, so I guess Jay, you want to talk to us about the fair sponsorship and what they're doing for us and?
Sure, yep, and thank you very much, Dave, for making that happen. So yes, we are, one of the sponsors for the Jefferson County Fair. We're gonna have a banner there, we're gonna have posters there, we're gonna be giving out the posters that we created for June, the ones that are right there on the table. They have placed our ad The long version, the 2-minute 14-second version of the commercial that was running all during June, that is on their Facebook page and on their website. So they were very, very, very appreciative of that sponsorship. That helped them out significantly. So kudos to you and the board of directors for making that happen. Tuesday. So very good, but thank you very much for doing that.
Does that come out of your budget, Jay?
Marshall and I are still discussing that.
And can drive.
Either way, we've got, the flexibility to do that. I mean, we're all very much anyways here, COVID and just being unable to do a lot of things. And it's,
We're marketing the county. Great. Alternative energy, Bill.
We didn't actually meet since last meeting.
I just have one thing, a request to Jay. Jay, yesterday Dave sent out an email about a new proposed project in the town of Hounsfield off the end of the airport, the 20 megawatt. It's on that portion of land owned by the hydro facility. And the county records show there's 100 acres of tillable land there. I think it'd be interesting, based upon your presentation in the past on tillable land impacts, maybe you could make a request of soil and water for soil breakdown, like you would if it was in the ag district, and then use that as a case study to see how your concept would affect pilot negotiations on that project.
Sure, yeah, I'd be more than happy to. I'll get the information from Dave and, we can.
This is a case study to see your concept, how it would affect if that project goes forward. If
Yeah.
you use it.
Absolutely.
Did I read that correctly? Isn't it in the farmland protection program? Didn't they call that out in the application?
I'm not,
I read that in that application, somewhere in
It's-
farmland protection.
it doesn't currently receive any agricultural district benefits. I know that much. It's currently just hay.
Yeah, it might be in the certified ag district, but I think what you're saying, Paul, is it doesn't receive an ag value assessment, which I don't
From
know.
what I saw in the county records, it's not receiving an ag exemption,
Yeah,
which would require rollback taxes.
right,
But even if it's in an ag district,
that doesn't.
so I just think it would make sense to look at that as like a test case study for your concept.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's a good idea, but I give you the down and dirty after it's done, it won't be applicable. Farm that land for
Well, I don't disagree with
soil
that.
types and everything, it's not gonna, there won't be anything there classified as prime farmland. Because of drainage, because of soil groupings.
Yeah, but we could still run it
Right.
and just, see what it shows up as. So, great idea, great idea.
Building and grounds. We'll probably have a quick review of that. And
yeah, I think anything under building ground would be considered the idea for this. It's going to require actions.
Jay,
Agriculture?
agriculture.
Well, good morning, everybody. So lots going on, some of the information that you've been sent previously. And if you have any questions outside of the meeting, feel free to ask. So where do I start? Meat processing, meeting with some of the small scale meat processors, one today, and I'm setting up meetings for the other one in the future. There's a grant opportunity that just came out that could potentially help with their interest to go from small scale custom processing to small scale USDA processing. So I'm going to be running out to one of them this afternoon, meet with them and start to help them through that process. So hopefully it'll help move some of those along. No, I'm starting to draw blanks. On the video, very interesting. Commissioner Ball, New York State Department of Ag and Markets, requested the opportunity to showcase that at his Dairy Day breakfast at the New York State Fair. So that continues to generate interest out there, which is fantastic. You know, we've gotten so much response back from that. It's been great. We've been working, met with a local furniture maker a week ago, looking at what kind of help we can provide them with a little expansion project. So there's a lot of things going on and a lot more to come. So we just put in a proposal for a manufacturing project that we found out about through the state. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of things going on, and certainly appreciate the work that all of you have done to support agriculture in a lot of different ways. So thank you very much. Oh, and if anybody is interested, like usual, I have tickets. These are 2 for 1, buy one, get one free for the Watertown Rapids baseball games. These are good for any game coming up, even tonight. So if you're interested, let me know. I got lots of them. That's it. Thank you.
I'll say it was a quick summary, but Jay's been putting in team a lot of work on this proposal, for example, this last dairy processing. I think you mentioned the other one. And actually, I mentioned I was on a call the other day with the regional council, and ESD was talking, and even one of the folks at ESD, you know, just initially, they were mentioning the relationship with the counties in the North Country, and the idea of being engaged, and said, for example, Jefferson County mentioned the proposal they got on that project, and you know, commended how well done it was. So.
Good job, Jay.
Teamwork.
Absolutely.
Or the annual meeting that was planned, is all an option, or you just gonna bump it to next year?
I had not considered doing one for the fall. I would say let's talk about that at the Ag Council meeting on the 20th and discuss whether we want to do something or not. It's a little bit short to put together a big annual meeting type effort because of the amount of fundraising I'll have to do. But we raised $10,000 in 2 months this spring, so you never know. But anyways, if the Ag Council would like a annual meeting / conference type program, you know, we can certainly entertain that and see what we can put together.
Thanks, Jay. Manufacturing, Dave?
Sure. Well, now that the COVID's up, I haven't had a chance yet. We've been preoccupied with a lot of other things, but we're going to reconvene, get our manufacturing council reconvene, get going back to meetings. I will say that the safety training program we're just talking about before the meeting, continuing with that again this year. We started halfway through the year because of the delays in the state getting the award notices out and funding issues with the state. But we'll be wrapping that up into July. But we've got the week after next, the deadline is due for the next grant application. So actually, I talked to high-tech businesses, which typically, we started out applying to Greater Jefferson County, then over the years we've expanded it to include the other 2 counties that are neighbors. And then we contracted with the state to do the training. But I talked to them about, and they're doing it, is they're gonna take the lead now in applying for the funds. Because I mean, we have in mind of doing it, but it's just with enough going on here. We're contracting them to do the training. It kind of eliminates our role as a middle person and kind of saves some administrative staff time on something that can be done directly through high-tech. So we're working with the other counties to support that project. So.
Any questions for Dave? Marshall, marketing.
Good morning, everyone. A couple of quick things. We have restarted our Canadian, we've restarted basically all of our advertising vehicles, digital. So we're doing this time around, we're doing some pre-roll as well as our YouTube campaign. We've re-engaged our Canadian consultant, and we are looking forward to the border being reopened. We continue with all of our interagency communications. And one new thing that has just been finalized is a snowmobile impact study for Jefferson, Lewis, Oneida, and St. Lawrence counties. That was a group effort, and the impacts on the snowmobiling are significant. It's a great program, and there's some nice graphics that kind of outline all the benefits of it. Among many other things that we had going on.
So that's out now, the impact study?
Yeah.
And is that through the Tuck Hill?
Tuck Hill.
So that's where we find it, on their website?
I'll be sending the graphic. We just got the finalized version yesterday, and you're going to see it all over social media and everything else.
Anything else?
That's it.
Unfinished business?
Two things for you. One, you recall the child care program we supported in partnership with Lewis County. That's underway now. I forget the number now, like 12? They ended up with 10 or 12. Interested parties basically did the orientation session, and now we kind of signed up and enrolling in the program to start some child care. The idea is to provide them some training and technical assistance, not just on complying with child care regulations, but also sort of dealing with the business side of the running of a home-based business as well. So hopefully they get through that, and we'll see a few more home-based child care opportunities here. And the other idea is we hear the state may be putting some funds toward child care programs. If it becomes available, we can kind of tweak this. We've got something running as a model that we can kind of tweak and improve and maybe carry out some state funding in the future.
And for reference, their typical cycle on that is like 3 students.
Yeah.
So this is a really significant increase for a critical thing.
The second thing, the comprehensive economic development strategy that we worked on in the county over 5 years, that's underway. What we also refer to as the SEDS. Actually, Marshall, Jay, and I are all on that committee, but there's a good cross section of people from various agencies representing various private sectors of private business. And we'll be meeting next week. We had some data analysis done by the consultants, Moyne Associates. Members of the committee, there's about 21 of us on the committee, have, based on discussion, stuff, kind of submitted ideas for various projects, along with Moyne's own suggestions based on their analysis, what they've heard through some of their interviews. They've done a series of one-on-one interviews with various business leaders around the county. And so we're going over that list, kind of starting to see something soon on that next week. So let's move along.
Dave, question. Do you anticipate that we might reinstate re-implement the economic forecast conferences that we used to do?
Yeah, good idea.
They were always interesting.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. We should do that.
One of the things that's.
One of those things we've kind of forgotten about, lost in the hustle lately, but we should be doing it.
One of the things that's servicing, I'm trying to get people back to work, is coming back to childcare. That's the stumbling block. A lot of people are ready to enter the workforce, but guess what? I got to handle the childcare, and there's no option.
It is, in fact, I just did a column in the Northern North Business Magazine about that. I mean, in fact, it is economic development. I mean, it's like workforce training. It just enables the workforce. It impedes recruitment. People either can't, or for the employers, it's workforce stability. Okay, someone's going to show up today or not show up because they can't get childcare.
And there are a lot of free childcare options where available, especially for essential workers. Here in the last 10 days or so, I believe it was 2.5 million was authorized for an appropriation for free childcare for essential workers.
The challenge is where are the childcare slots?
Something we did bring up similar to this, you talk about workforce stability, we had debated probably 2 years ago now, talking to the city and dealing with transportation out to the industrial parks on the edge and outside of the city limits. That does.
Yeah, actually, that's some of
I hear from time to time that's another significant problem. The buses drop you off and you gotta walk half a mile and you gotta do this. If there was a way to get bus runs in and out of parks.
I spoke to them about a year ago. We talked about this. The volunteer transportation center is kind of managing that for the city now. I think that is on their plan, working through that in phases. They're not there yet, but on my list to kind of touch base on just remind them.
Bill's got 40 million to spend, so they can maybe put a few bucks into it.
So
40. Well, I hear you got a lot of money.
Well, it's getting people out to the
20 anyway.
Getting worked out.
Some of that's gone our way.
Just getting work on corporate park, getting, people, to Fort Drum or from Fort Drum to the
Yeah.
community, so.
But I know like Lewis County does, they have bus runs to all
Yeah.
floors for students to go work at like Enchanted Forest. So they do different things, bringing them into the college campuses and things. So something similar in this area
Yeah.
to attract people from outside of the physical city limits to where it seems like our industry is growing, and it's not in the city limits
Right.
proper.
Yeah.
But that little gray line shouldn't be a barrier to getting people to work. Once their kids get babysat, they need to get to work.
Yeah, there's another challenge, you're right.
That is a big challenge,
Yeah.
from what I hear.
Yeah, but I wouldn't comment with them on that, too, so.
Housekeeping, I know it's been busy and everything. We are heading into budget season, so we'll have to get some committee meetings together. I believe, are we supposed to have our budget by August?
August, yes, we are. I completed the LDC and we'll probably wrap up IDA today.
Okay.
And I sent a copy to David, so we need to sit down and discuss it. And we need to schedule a finance committee, which we will do.
It would have to be presented at the August board meeting or the end of August.
We should have done it at this meeting,
Okay.
but it wasn't ready.
Okay.
And so we'll be a month late. August will be,
Okay.
August board meeting.
Anything else for the LDC?
Yeah, under new business, speaking of budgets, we have our annual letter from the county administrator about Agaman for the other agencies that they fund, saying it's time for our budget request, that if we need to request more funding, then they'll take that into consideration. We need to compare the forms, or if we need to, if we're fine with level funding, just to indicate that. I think probably given the situation, I mean, we're in a better position now, right now financially, the last time we actually asked for an increase. So I recommend that we just tell the county we're fine with level funding for next year.
Yeah.
We need to notify them, I think it's August 19th, or maybe it's the 20th. So that's, everybody's comfortable with that?
Yeah, for the status quo funding, I know we have some special projects that are other
Yes, yeah.
considerations.
So when you say level funding back to the county, I mean, I look at areas such as the micro enterprise loan fund, which is, kind of
Dwindled.
dwindled.
Yeah.
It's become more stable.
That's not counting funding.
All right.
That was,
That's my question.
yeah.
That was another,
The line.
So our county funding has always been about 270 for marketing and 136, I think, for ag. And last year, what is it?
130.
Yeah, and then last year they did an across the board 2% increase to all the agencies. So that new number is what we have now. Things like our revolving loan funds, micro enterprise, those were grants the county got that we were then became a subrecipient to municipals on behalf of the county.
we still probably have to, through finance or whoever the committee is, figure out a way to take some of these surplus funds we have from all of these projects and deploying into revolving loan and micro enterprise. Micro enterprise, I know it can't be called that, but we had that debate 2 years ago as well. It seems like everything was 2 years ago. But,
Yeah.
the micro enterprise stabilized a little bit. It looked like it was gonna be approaching zero quite quickly and didn't get there.
We've been there many times.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing.
Over the 13, 14 years I've been there.
We gotta bet on the successes.
Bill, what kind of shape is the county?
We seem to be pretty good shape. I mean, that some of the things that we anticipated, like sales tax and stuff, didn't really go down as low as we thought. Actually, it's been good, so I think we're in pretty good shape.
Actually, the tourism side, I think this is an side, Corey Fram, the Director of Tourism Council, is telling us that right now their bookings are up to where they were in 2019, before the pandemic. So they're getting back on, I mean, sure, they felt the pain, I mean, some very serious pain last year because of the pandemic, but they're kind of rebounding. So.
The federal funding helped everyone through.
Yeah.
I think so too. If boat traffic and fishing trailers are any indication of tourism, it's back beyond all indications of the highest possible. It's just they're not Canadian plates, they're Delaware, Pennsylvania, and it's just different group of people showing up to this area for world-class fishing.
But I'll say this, watch out though, with the border opening.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for opening the border, I can't wait, but let's all be prepared, we will giving up our seats at any of the restaurants. We
That's
don't
right.
giving up our seats.
I've done that
for any
anyway, so
event
they're
we
gonna
wanna
get
go to.
Take
Get
that
in
good
line,
enough.
it'll be get in line.
Do you need a motion
It would be the same way going the other way.
Except to go back to the
Yes, you can, the two.
Yes, so we want a motion for the budget request to the county?
Sure.
I'll move it.
second?
On the budget request to the county, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Well, one thing I should have mentioned, Bill, on the SEDS plan this year, so it's a federal grant from the Economic Development Administration, and it's matched partly by cash from us, cash from the county, and in kind from the county, and us in terms of the development of the SEDS plan, comprehensive economic development strategy. An element of that, part of the match is coming from the South Island Council. Their funds are going toward we're taking kind of a specific focus on the hospitality and tourism industry. So we're doing a separate report for them that's going to be incorporated into the SEDS overall recommendation. But just recognizing the importance of tourism in the area and that. So that'll be part of this one.
Very good. Anyone have anything else for the LDC?
Nothing from council, I see Justin.
Morning, Justin.
Hey, good morning, folks.
You don't have anything for the LDC this morning?
No, I don't have any items over here to report on. I'll follow up with Dave and Lyle on any of the loan approvals if they need any assistance for closings.
Perfect.
It's got a lot for the IDA.
I'll move for adjournment of the LDC.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? You stand adjourned. Boy, we're almost on time. With that,
We'll blow that budget right now.
I'll call to order the Jefferson County Industrial Development Agency. This is our July board meeting. And with that, I'll open the privilege of the floor. Anyone want to address the board?
Yes, my name is Norm Paradis. I'm a town board member from the town of Worth. And I just was thrown this in my lap concerning the UTEP policy that you're proposing to change. You'll have to forgive me, I don't have all the information I need because the supervisor gave me this information yesterday as far as the proposed change in the policy. Basically, from what I understand, it affects the towns rather than agreeing to what you call the neighborhood,
Host community.
Host community agreement.
Yeah, that's it. This way, the money that the town's getting from the applicants for renewed energy normally would go to the town. Now, with that change, from what I understand, is that with the money coming in for the town now would be taken away from through the pilot program. Is that my understanding, or how is that working?
No, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, if you want to get the discussion now, or maybe address it when we're doing discussion, but however you want to do it, when the board needs to discuss it.
We can address it when we get to it in the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll address that and
Yeah.
that's in our agenda, so we'll,
All right, well, I
You're welcome.
appreciate
But
you.
if you have specific concerns you'd like to bring, you identify right now, we'll discuss.
Okay.
Take that.
Yeah, I just, I guess the whole thing that I'm looking at, without getting into too many wishes and questions and all that stuff, is that you as a JCIDA, your policy is to encourage investment and job creation and retention in Jefferson County. I get the impression you are discouraging towns to take the brave step of welcoming renewable energies in their regions, in their town or in the county by changing that policy. Because the host community money that the applicants would give to the town would encourage the town to send this money could be used for a park or whatever to improve the town's environment. So that's all I have to say for now. I don't know if I can speak later on. But, I feel a little intimidated in front of all.
We
Don't
feel intimidated by us.
You might be sitting here in 2 years.
We've taken your name down, you'll be nominated.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Ken Glacier with the town of Rutland. I'm here about the pilot program also. So, wait till you get into it, I guess.
Similar concern, the same style of concern?
Yeah.
All over the host community agreement clause for the UTEP.
Mr. Valentine, how are you?
You're not here for the youth.
I'm here just as a tenant of the industrial park, and I noticed on the agenda a discussion on zoning changes with the town of Watertown. And I know a year ago, we talked about better communication with the town and the JCIDA. I've been attending all the planning board meetings I can and following the website for the town board meeting and minutes, and I have not seen any discussion about zoning changes. So this is the first chance I have to see what the talk is about and hopefully learn something from this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we think one on Zoom?
Craig Fox. I'm assuming you said Fox.
Thank you, gentlemen. We all received the minutes from our both meetings. We had a June 3rd and our special meeting of June 14th.
Has offered no changes to either. I make a motion to accept as presented.
Okay. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a motion to approve, all, or accept. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Treasurer's report.
Page 28 of your packet, excuse me. Break-even budget is 109,500 a month. We're averaging a little over 200,000, predominantly from the lease-back sale revenue. Contribution from the closings that we've had to date, and there's a few more coming through. So that's putting us in the surplus in the revenue side and the operational expense side. Again, break even is an average of 109,500 a month. We're only spending 100,000, so we're spending less, earning more, which shows surplus to date of 931,000 odd dollars. That should certainly grow. I know we're going to spend some more, and we've got a few more closings that may happen in this fiscal year, which I believe you have to book by the 30th of September.
Yes.
Right? So it certainly should stay a very significant surplus. It may actually be in the 7 figures by the time we're done, which is a good thing. We just have to find a way to reserve that for next year. Page 29 of your packet is 146 Arsenal. So year to date, we spent 186,000. Some of those are soft costs like depreciation and things like that. It looks like we've spent an actual, when you account for electric, water, salary expense, real monies. We spent 105,000 to date. It looks like by the end of the year, end of the year being October, if we weren't to close prior to then, we might spend as much as 130,000, maybe approaching 150, which is better than last year. Last year we spent a little bit more than that, and I know a lot of it's hinging upon getting the remediation in place and getting the closing. So hopefully we can close before the end of this fiscal year and stop that. Page 30 of your board packet is your balance sheet. Quick assets, 485,000 higher than prior period. Receivables, 493, lower than prior period. The miscellaneous funds are about 4,000 lower, so net effect of current assets are 12,000 lower than prior period. Total assets are about 18,000 lower than prior period, and total current liabilities virtually unchanged, $1,300 less than prior period. And total capital is 16,000 lower than prior period. Still in very good position with regards to all of the funding and what have you. Page 30. Turn the page here. I think it's 36. Yeah. Page 36, 7, and 8 are just snapshots of our various loan programs. The revolving loan fund, we've got a few that are delinquent, and I'm sure we're following up on those. I don't know if there's anything, Lyle, you said you prepared this report?
Yes.
Okay, anything you want to add with any of the?
No, it's pretty much the same as last month.
There virtually is unchanged.
Actually, we don't have any delinquencies in the RLF. We have some
Micro.
Oh, sorry. I got a staple right there. It looked like it said revolving. Sorry, you're right. Micro.
Yeah. And then those.
Okay.
Slope.
Yeah, and 38 is our larger funds program. That's all good. So that's the treasurer's report. I would move to accept as presented.
Second. Any discussion or questions on the treasurer's report? On the motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Loan review, Rob.
Okay, loan review. We had, one item that we debated, and then there was a couple other topics. Standard machine and fabrication, you'll see there's a resolution which we'll let Dave Converse address here in a moment. They were requesting 20,000 to establish some additional equipment to provide a kind of an essential service that doesn't appear to be located within the geographical area, to develop a machine shop to service local repairs. So they would take outsourced machining rotors and heads and things of this nature, which a lot of the car manufacturers don't do inside. So Justin Poirier, I think is his name. Yeah, Justin Poirier. He made a good presentation to us. We considered it, and we would be in a second position behind Watertown Savings Bank. And we had really no issues with the loan application. It was well done. So, Mr. Converse, I'll leave it to you.
Resolution number 0709, 2021.01. It's a resolution for authorizing a micro enterprise loan to Standard Machine and Fabrication. It's a loan for $20,000 with 5-year amortization at a rate of 5%.
I'll move the resolution.
Second, and third.
Further discussion.
Glad to see it. It's great they need it. We need it utilized.
Yeah, good
A lot of
job.
that stuff is all going to Syracuse right
And
now.
that's what he said.
On the motion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Rob.
Mhm.
Unfinished business, Dave, 146 Arsenal.
Right, well, we'll start here. Actually, I don't know if maybe you want to move these out. I mean, if Ed wants to say that's fine, we could, but the court park zoning could probably be a quicker topic.
Sure.
We want to address that now and get that out of the way. So, so you know, to Ed, so I attended a work session with the town plan back early June. And their plan, what they said, rather than try to go through a whole zoning amendment or zoning overlay, their preference is to propose that their site plan review would include a requirement that the project comply with any existing covenants of the property.
When you say there, you mean town of Watertown?
Town of Watertown,
Okay.
yeah. So meaning that if it didn't comply with the covenants, then, and they would want a letter from the ID saying that it does or does not, requirement of approval. But a couple of things, they want to leave the interpretation of whether something complies with the covenants on the IDA. Things like setback requirements, things that are pretty straightforward. There's no interpretation, but that's their preference. So my other question then, which they're still trying to determine is that, okay, if you go that route, can the town, because part of our interest is the zoning amendments done is that it then can be enforced through the town. The town is in a better position to enforce that as part of site plan review and zoning than we are as an agency. And They believe so, but they're waiting for a word on their attorney, Joe Russell, on whether that is enforceable. So I just talked to them about a week ago and they hadn't gotten an answer back to that yet.
In their scheme of doing this, we have to be present during the site plan review?
No.
Because it would just delay the approval of any project.
We would just have to give, send a letter saying that the project does or does not comply with.
So as they accept an application, we would be an involved agency essentially and say, does this or doesn't this apply to you? And then they could or could not rely upon our advice.
Right.
It puts us in a crap position.
Right, yeah, it does. I think that they're putting it on us. I mean,
Justin probably has a more technical term for it, but.
Yeah, the intent is that they'll say, in other words, if we say it doesn't comply with the covenants, they're saying then the town will not give it approved site plan.
And that just expands the number of people that could be brought.
All I got
into
to
an
say is
article.
covenants are absolute.
Yeah.
The town should just do what they're asked to do by law, period. I don't know why we're getting involved with this dance and the slow dance. Frankly, it's my opinion.
Well, sometimes, for example, our setback in the covenant is 75 feet. The town's setback in the zoning is 50 feet.
Great.
So the town could approve 50 feet.
We gave an opportunity. It's a planned development district. It's a simple thing in zoning. All they gotta do is say the covenants are the rules, period.
Yeah.
I mean, Justin, again, probably has more technical terms, but.
I think
Hopefully it's crap.
let's not forget that Joe Russell, that represented us in the past, represents the town, and he told us all along that the town could not enforce the deed covenants. And that's the reason we suggested an overlay district to the town. I don't know why they're worried about having to interpret it. They have to interpret it in every other zone that they create the use of.
Here's the way I look at it, Dave. Every time we interpret something that doesn't benefit an applicant that doesn't like an answer, you got an Article 78 shoved right up our butt. And we're gonna be paying legal defenses and fighting useless claims and basically just babysitting everything. It's just not worth our effort. I hate to be so blunt about this, but it's a crap position.
Well, we created a park subcommittee here to deal with park issues, and maybe it's time that we get that committee to meet with the town again and explain our concerns and hear theirs and move forward. I mean, Ed's right. It's been, ever since COVID, we haven't had a meeting. Well, once we did, we met with individuals, but it's time to pick that up again and see if we can't convince the town that an overlay district is really in not only their best interest, but the park owner's interest.
So maybe we do that. We'll see if we can schedule a work session, make an open work session, maybe have some, make it open so that there can be comments from part-times as well.
Where's Joe Russell going? Paul and that as far as their legal representative.
Well, he's consistent with what he told us in the past. It's not the town's responsibility to enforce the covenants.
Which is not true. It's not under the current. What we're trying to do is try to get the town to incorporate that.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is, so is that a case where Justin and some?
I'm gonna ask Justin we'll ask Justin to take a look at it and give us some advice as the best way to move with this.
Sure, yeah, I'm aware of some of the issues in the background with the companies that have been cited there that are somewhat inconsistent with the covenants and the issues that are going on with other landowners and developers that are there already. We can take a closer look at the covenants themselves and some of the backdrop and get the agency some alternatives or at least an analysis of what the potential recourse is depending on which path you go down. I know you're juggling with former council issues and their relationship with the town, so we'll try to be as tactful and helpful as we can be.
Thank you.
Yep.
By the way, I don't mean to have it back to you.
No, it's okay. No worries at all.
Making faces at you.
He had his camera off.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll let you know when we get something set up.
Super.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's go right to number 3. USL&E.
So US Light Energy, the solid tube solar project, that was a project that was up in Philadelphia that was associated with OCC North. They had some confusion. over that project about whether or not they needed to go through the IDA for tax abatement. I realized they did it last minute. Remember, we were actually working at that point to try to fast track at least to do maybe a temporary tax abatement while we negotiate things. They finally decided, we'll just work directly with the taxing jurisdictions. And so they had submitted applications. Matt Moses, Swartz and Moses said they didn't really have anything worth billing on that project. We did do some now, so they're asking for a refund of the fee, which is $2,500 per project, which is $10,000. So there was no real legal fees in that case. We did do some work on staff as far as trying to cost benefit analysis, bringing it back to the board and discussing that. So, I think it probably warrants a portion of a refund. I guess, what the board might be comfortable with, if anything, but they're requesting a refund of the full 10. And I told them, we would look, but it is not from what we could probably consider, a partial refund. So.
Do you think keeping 2,500 is enough for the effort we put into it, or more? Throw a number.
You're looking at me.
Yeah, well, I'm just.
Well, if it's Lyle, we gotta keep the full 10.
There's a significant amount of work that goes in the process.
Yeah, I was thinking of refunding half of it.
And, the 2,500 is clearly indicated as non-refundable.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, we spent more than $2,500.
I mean, I'm comfortable with say half, because.
You think 5,000 of the 10 is fair? I mean, because you did, there were 4 projects, so I'm assuming the work was somewhat.
I tend to agree with David. I think that half is.
Okay.
And I guess it'd be different if we didn't also have 2 other projects we just closed with them on.
I mean, in reality, that's $100 an hour, 50 hours. I mean, any way you want to slice it, I mean, that's a fairly going rate for professional services.
One quick question. Our policy says it's a non-refundable fee.
Deducted from the final fee.
Do we have audit concerns if we decide to refund a portion?
No, I don't believe so. I think as a board, you have that power.
I think we justify it by the fact that it did not go all the way. I mean, as long as we document why.
Because we also, if you recall, we've collected reduced fees from certain projects. Remember, we kind of clustered a couple of them that said, hey, it's not 4 projects, we'll treat it as 1. So we've done the opposite where we've collected reduced fees.
Then I would move we refund 50% of the application fees.
So that would be 5,000 and keep 5.
Yep.
Okay, just making sure we got.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any other discussion? On the motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And like I said, I feel different if we didn't also have like the 2 other projects we just closed on recently.
I think that's, I think, more than fair.
They won't feel the same way, but that's like,
The amount of,
sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you.
the spinning we had to do on that project, from,
Yeah,
they dragged this one, let's not forget, this all began back when Don was chief executive officer, and they were not responding to him, and we were asking for applications, so he didn't send it. I mean, they created their own mess.
It's been a year.
Grateful. You feel guilty one bit.
Okay. Let's go back to 146 Arsenal.
Okay, well, we've got Brad Arthur here from Paradigm Environmental and Mike Harris from the BCA group. So I thought maybe have them get on a quick overview. And Brad and Mike, I'm not sure if it's best to kind of start with the overall plan, Mike, that you've been coordinating with Brad and Priscilla. Maybe Brad, maybe start off with kind of an assessment of where we're at with the what we found and what the process is with EPA. And then maybe Mike talk about how we addressed it. So.
Okay. So I don't know how far back you want to go, but so we most recently completed the pilot test work that we discussed in the last meeting. And we had really some good results out of that and found that we could not guarantee, but optimistically achieve the level of 1 ppm of PCB in the concrete by just scarification with no chemical extraction. And that's good news. The chemical extraction is very aggressive, which would be by nature to be able to combat something like the PCBs. But it allows fewer steps and potentially less of an issue with remnants of the chemical extraction materials. So based on that, Mike and Purcell and everyone's been talking about how we go through with just scarification of the concrete. And one thought that we came up with is do it in an iterative style. So we know at 1/4 of an inch, we had some good success, but also some at 1/8 of an inch. So the idea would be to scarify 1/8 of an inch, at least in a initial area, do some concrete borings, analyze those for PCBs and see how successful we were. If for some reason we weren't successful, we would go down the next 1/8 of an inch to where we pretty much know that the PCBs are gone.
Are we gonna do the complete asbestos abatement prior to starting any scarifying?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that all has to be done first. And actually, we have to do some demolition of non-contaminated materials, drywall, carpet, et cetera, prior to doing any of the remedial work.
Brad, you would use the same style of equipment enclosures for both asbestos and dust-borne silica anyway, correct? So
That's
it's not really an additional enclosure or negative air systems or anything?
That's correct. It's just a different filtration for the dust than it is for the asbestos. We go from a HEPA filter to a combination of a HEPA and a charcoal filter potentially.
Is this just an analysis, or we determined there's asbestos in the building?
No, we know there's asbestos in the floor tile.
The floor tile.
That was the one thing that was tested.
And that we expected. I mean, and why I expected that as part of the overall project. What we did not expect was finding the PCB.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the asbestos abatement would be on the wire?
Yeah, either directly or indirectly. So we may end up, so it'll be kind of, we won't take on that cost since they would have been dealing with that anyways. We may take on that cost in our project and swap out, you know, because as Brad mentioned and Michael explained, there'll be some demolition involved. Then of course we have to rebuild it back to what it was. So why might take on the rebuilding? If we did, you know, it's gonna work. We're trying to work out what works best, so it's still the equivalent. You know,
As far as what was in the Y's additional scope, to kind of ask a further question of Dave's, they were gonna remove the floor tile and the mastic?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, but the mastic is the part that we now have to basically fund the.
Well,
the
mastic would be
the control of the contaminant.
bulk removal anyway, Brad can explain, but what happened though was because the mastic was contaminated, that leached into the cement, which caused.
So, I mean, so our scope of work, if you want to call it, starts at the top of the concrete.
Yes.
Yes.
So the tile and the mastic and everything that goes along with that, it was in the Y's budget and in their scope regardless. Our scope of work starts at the face of the concrete.
But will also include some of the demolition and rebuild our responsibility, because the demo, he said, to get underneath some of the walls.
But I'm sure in practicality, they're going to scarify the mastic off with the concrete. So I mean, there's that, like you said, that horse trading of let's do this common sense wise.
Can I ask Brad a question? So we know if we go 1/4 inch, we get everything we need. In some of the areas in the inch. If we just go in and scarify the whole 1/4 inch versus doing it, going back and testing it, is it that much more of a cost to take the full 1/4 inch off the whole floor and just get it over with and be sure we've got it all than doing it and going back and checking it, finding areas we have to go back and do more? Is it exponentially more expensive to take that extra 1/8 inch off?
Yeah, I'll comment. So the initial bulk cost is in the mobilization and the initial scarification. So that by square foot is much higher than the iterative process. However, there's other factors involved. The weight of the extraction, or excuse me, the scarified material, and the fact that that has to go to Michigan is a big factor. The hauling and the incineration costs of the PCB waste. So if we can save on that, it does reduce the overall cost of the project significantly, and it's much more than the iterative testing that we would do in the middle. Okay. It potentially saves significant time on the project as well.
Okay.
The scarification process is relatively slow, probably doing upwards of maybe 2,000 square feet a day per machine.
At what depth though? The 2,000 square feet is per 8?
Per 1/8 of an inch.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it'll be 1,000 per quarter, simply?
Yeah,
Okay.
simply, yeah.
So in your analysis, it's cheaper to do it in the take an 1/8 inch and then go back if you got to?
It could be cheaper.
Okay.
So we may find very early on that taking 1/8 of an inch is not gonna achieve the level we need, and we'll go right to the full 1/4 of an inch.
A question from one of your, I think it was one of your prior presentations or maybe in our emails. I thought bulk weight actually helped us with the tipping fee because the amount of contaminant for bulk weight would be reduced and the tipping fee would be less, or did I misunderstand? Like if you're taking an 1/8 that's more highly contaminated, the tipping fee would be higher presumably than a 1/4 with the same amount of contaminant, so you actually have less BPMs in that waste. I thought I picked that
Well,
up.
that's what
in some
we're
of our
talking about, whether
emails.
one of the options might be.
That was
removing the
Oh, the whole floor, but wouldn't the same take place with 1/4 versus 1/8? Because weights are fresh.
Thanks for saying that.
Not really.
Well, it is. I don't mean personal.
In terms of the disposal process, what happens to it? It goes to an incinerator?
It goes to an incinerator. PCB waste is incinerated.
So does the agency have a long-term liability with that?
From, well, you as the generator of the waste have responsibility to ensure that it's disposed of properly. So through this process, there will be waste manifests that are generated. We'll track it from cradle to grave. And once it's incinerated, you'll get confirmation back that it has been disposed of properly.
It doesn't go to a landfill or anything like that?
No.
It just burned up?
Not at those levels. It does have to get burned.
Mike, you want to kind of give an overview of the, and so BCA is kind of coordinating with Brad and with Purcell, because they'll need to take Brad's guidance on the remediation, translate some design aspects of it, and then be looking at Purcell eventually, we're actually doing the management of it.
One more thought on the scarification process, 1/8 inch versus a 1/4. The scarification is done in layers. So it's not as though if we decide a 1/4 inch is going to be necessary over the entire building, we can go right to a 1/4 inch. It's still going to be either 16th inch pass or 1/8. So regardless, it's a process, and it's kind of each time we scarify or go through the entire building, it's the added time to the
Yeah, so it's 2 passes to get to an 1/8 inch.
So just for confirmation that Paradigm's doing the environmental.
Yep.
BCNA is gonna be doing the architectural, so.
Yeah, we're preparing the full set of documents for Purcell to procure to bid, to get pricing from. The information that Brad's providing will insert in our set, but it'll be a comprehensive set from mobilization right to put back, well, the demolition, whatever's necessary to get to the slab itself. The scarification process, the information comes from Brad. And then once it's scarified, the next step is to put a slab back. We're gonna go back with topping that is the depth of what was scarified out to give a nice smooth underlayment for the finished floors, which will eventually go on. We're also thinking that it may be more beneficial, and there might be a cost, a balance to be made if we go back with a thicker depth. If we take out a 1/4, we might want to go back with actually an inch. If we go back with a 1/4, we're using a very expensive cast underlayment. It's a pie product or a Ardex. If we can go back with a thicker material, we can use something that's more concrete, cementitious-like, and the material costs are much less, and I think the application costs. It may prove to be economically the equivalent, but that's something that we're still in the process of.
Have we considered this project separate from the WISE project?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is Purcell now our GC for this?
Well, we have got, so what'll happen is, Mike, you probably explain this, is that BCA group would develop the designs, that's all stuff that Purcell would use to bid the project on our behalf. Purcell would then be the construction, they would be actually managing the people doing the demolition, the remediation, the build.
So we would be paying Purcell as our construction manager?
Yeah. Yeah, so either that or have Marshall Line do it.
No, I didn't know if this was for open competitive bid.
Get a free cubicle with every 1/4 inch.
So I think I may have mentioned this previously. So our intent at this point would be to utilize BCA and Purcell, use under our procurement policy, doing single source. So single source is when, sole source is when there's only one person that can do it. Single source, there may be other options for doing it, but for reasons of expediency, maybe they're a new project, we can, instead of bidding for those services. But then what we would do is we would bid for the remediation service. So when we contract out for that, they would get proposals, then we would have to approve the bid for that.
So just rolling with Dave, so Paradigm's working with BCA then, so you're the environmental leads on this?
Yeah, we're contracting directly with Brad for that, yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
So we're contracting directly with Paradigm, and then, BCA basically coordinate taking that stuff from Paradigm and translating it to.
So we have one contract relationship with Paradigm.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a contract relation with BCA.
Yeah.
And then everything else that happens from
Well, another
BCA
one-
downwards, we don't.
Well, another one for South, so then everything forward, we'll have to actually.
Okay.
Thank you. Because they're familiar with the product, they've been involved since the beginning, it'll be cheaper, quicker, faster, and we've got too much at stake to try to delay this by going through the whole RFP process.
One quick question. You had mentioned about the extensive amount of work that needed to be done to get a plan in front of the EPA for this. Has that begun for this remediation program?
It has, yeah, so that's where the next thing I was going to say, that's why I stood up, is that the next key hurdle is completing the remediation plan, the self-implemented remediation plan for the EPA, and then getting it in front of them. That groundwork has been laid with the EPA already. We've had many conversations with them and have already started formulating that remediation plan through the testing that we've been doing and really how we got to this point in the decision we've made.
Yeah, and hopefully Brad's ongoing communication with the EPA that he's been carrying on, maybe help expedite.
So will we meet the start date required for the grants from the federal government?
We will.
Okay. And you will have, the good part is that we don't have to wait for the EPA approval to start some of the other work, like demolition and the asbestos abatement work. That can all be done outside of the EPA approval.
Mike, you may not be able to answer this, but the 1/4 inch we're removing, when we talk about putback, and I get that. Is it even necessary? Is a 1/4 inch elevation difference going to affect the Wise build out plans? Like, why are we putting something back? I'm assuming they're putting a flooring in there anyway.
Well, when the scarification process is done, it's gonna be a very rough surface.
I get that.
Regardless, we would need that smooth 1/4. We'd have to go back with the 1/4 inch to get it smooth.
So, but they're putting something over the floor, whether it's smooth or rough.
Yeah, but the finished product that's going over that would have ripples in it or would have deviations if there wasn't a smooth underlay.
Okay. So they're not putting like a tiling down or like a cementitious or masonry style tile, or they're putting something?
Well, there'll be various areas, there'll be ceramic tile in the bathrooms, there'll be sports flooring in the courts, but it all comes down to.
I guess it goes to what my biggest concern is, how much of this is already in the Wise budget? It seems like something might be redundant. And, I mean, a smooth surface, I guess, is what we had promised them.
Why don't we have laid floor, and it doesn't cause some issues when you get.
No, I get all of that, but we're an information company, and you can put things over unsmooth surfaces and make them look good.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm getting at. Scarification isn't gonna be like a sine wave.
Right, yeah.
It's gonna be slight ripples, you fill it with grout, and you put a tiling on. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to preserve and horse trade with Purcell and why that we're not doing extra work just because?
Well, they already so floor that they're gonna put tile down, commercial tile. I mean, the base or the border under the tile would completely.
That's my point.
Would completely cover the scarification.
These days, the tile is on mastic, so it's not necessarily a mortar set, like you're thinking of a thick mortar set, this is a mastic, it's a glue, thin set glue.
Okay.
Yeah, but the way we're putting the plans together, there may be alternatives, like if you talk about the concrete, we would go back with a 1/4, we go back with an inch. We'll get the pricing on all, and anything that is at all ambiguous, we can call it, we can make it a bid item, so we can go back to you with pricing, and you can determine if it's the Wise expense or the IDA.
I guess those are the only things, like, you bring up mastic, it seems like maybe it's cheaper for us to pay for an extra 1/8 inch mastic than put back and use it as this. Yeah, those are the things that we're gonna rely upon your experience, but I have a genuine concern about how much, I mean, clearly how much money we have to spend versus how much was in the original bid. That's the balancing act we're trying to, really clearly determine. This is a long-range partnership, so I'm sure we're all in this for the same purpose, and we just want to make sure that we get through to the end. The end goal is to do it on budget and on time, and that we all have to do that and safely.
So
I have no doubt he's 2 steps ahead of us.
Oh, I'm sure he is.
Well, and we'll know more once we get to the design and look at those cost alternatives. We'll know more.
And we've got Justin and Harris Beach on the board to make sure that everything.
Yeah.
And it's nothing against these guys, but to make sure that we're protected with the EPA and environmentally and everything like that. So all that documentation that Paradigm will provide, they're gonna review and make sure that we're covered. Right? He's shaking his head.
Yeah, and Joe, what's his, I forget his last name, Justin, your partner.
Yeah, my partner, Joe Pachody's environmental specialist, and he's kind of riding shotgun here to monitor the actual remediation and the EPA monitoring and enforcement stuff. So we should be in good shape.
Dave, from your standpoint, I guess this is more semantics. I mean, I think normally this falls under you have approval once we do it. Are you probably going to do some checkbacks, like as we, like, I think you have a document in front of us to approve some form of expense, but it may or may not fit under your role to just do things. Is your plan to kind of keep coming back to the board?
As we need to, yeah. I mean, we want to keep everybody informed of this thing as we move ahead. Yeah. So I think we're looking, at least for now, I mean, approval to engage BCA with the letter. In fact, did we get a proposal from you? I just got back into town late last night. Did we get a proposal back from you?
Yes, I think that last night.
Did that get up to the board?
No, well, we have some older stuff from Paradigm. I don't recall anything recent.
This is for BCA.
No, he was talking about Paradigm.
Yeah. Brad said something yesterday, but I was in flight. I didn't know if I got.
We have BCAs. I don't recall anything from Paradigm in the last couple of weeks.
Well, the good news is, though, correct me if this is generality, the cost to remediate that probably just got cut in half, did it not?
Well, not quite. Again, there's some upfront costs and mobilization and so on, but if we're successful with an 1/8 of an inch, it's a significant cost reduction.
Yeah. I guess to continue the discussion, so BCA has put a proposal, you got a resolution to get approval. They've actually submitted a proposal in short form AIA terms. I guess a question for Justin, does our procurement policy allow us to use third-party set of terms, or do we have terms that we're gonna want to employ when we develop a purchase order for consulting services, essentially?
Generally speaking, the consulting services or professional services stem from most procurement policies. So there's the ability to directly engage for consultants, professional services.
I just want to make sure we're considering the full package. I mean, the AIA is a very standard set of terms and conditions, nothing to matter with them, but I didn't know if we had terms that maybe BCA hasn't seen from us that we have in our procurement policy.
All right. If the IDA is going to directly engage any construction services, stuff outside of consultancy or professional, then an AIA is a good contract to use. It's a standard form that's fairly accepted industry-wide. There may be some specific matters with respect to the IDA that we would integrate, matters subject to appropriation, things like that. Additional indemnity.
When we get into engaging Purcell, I think the short form doesn't really address a lot of the indemnity and other matters that I think don't come into play when we're engaging an architect engineer. So maybe we have to consider something different when we engage Purcell, if we have to engage them directly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. I run out of questions, Dave, sorry.
That's fine. Are you ready to make a motion that we engage
I would move we
BCA?
engage BCA
Oh, well,
for
I'll
design
do that.
services.
Okay,
I'll second it.
alrighty. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
So are we gonna amend our agenda to include that we received at Paradigms? We gotta get that started too, correct?
Should have been started before this. Well, it's part of this. I guess BCA can't finish until Paradigm does it. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Yeah.
So you have a proposal that you've sent that we should act on today.
Yes.
You'd like us to act.
Yes. Since I've already started work on it, I probably,
Okay.
great if you,
I thought we already approved Paradigm to start something.
That was,
Am I?
that was the preliminary.
Oh, that was the preliminary testing, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew there was some
Yeah,
discussion. Okay, that was just the stuff we physically had to complete for the testing and such, okay.
my current proposal includes the design for the EPA work, but also the design work and specifications that have to go into BCA's package. And then all of the associated monitoring for the asbestos removal, the PCB oversight. And to be honest, the most significant cost in it is the PCB concrete testing that has to be done. And that is a significant variable right now with the unknown input from the EPA and what they're going to require. So once that feedback is received, we can finalize the cost. So what's in that proposal is simply budget with unit pricing for the PCB clearance testing, as I'll call it.
So is that what you call your PCB analytical costs?
There's a spare copy if anyone did it.
So at some point, there may be need early on for some of the expedited processing, but I'd rather explain to you too, once we get into it, because of the time, then at that point, for them to verify and test back, we'll use a non-expedited testing to lower the cost of the sample. So it'll be basically, the needs of the product are to be determined by what we find out as we test it and go along.
There is a similar comment that we've kind of beaten up already. When we're all done, regardless of what the total expense is, we'll net out with the Y and things that they should have considered in their budget, and we can just have that relationship with the Y, and we have the ability to, I guess, claw back funds from them somehow, or, I mean.
We own the building?
Well,
It's swap.
But I just mean, I shouldn't have said it that way, but we have the ability of trading. Okay?
Yes.
And the Y is aware of that.
And that'll be easier to be more specific about it once we actually see.
I mean, right now, we're
design
talking in
and
total
the actual
generalizations,
curve,
we may be responsible for everything. I don't believe that, but we may be.
Just a couple quick questions. When you say PCB remediation monitoring labor 30-day estimate, you're estimating that the scarification is a 30-day project? Once we get going, and if
There's a qualifying statement after that, that once we know two things, what the EPA is going to require from the testing, and then also, once a contractor is chosen and we understand their needs and methods and their schedule, then we can finalize that. Again, this is just for budgetary purposes based on the unit rates that are set forth in the proposal.
The unit
do
rates,
you know what the per ton disposal fees or incineration fees are?
So-
Absent of trucking?
My understanding is that out of the total cost for disposal, which would include the hauling, the disposal costs are relatively low per ton or per weight unit. It's getting it from point A to point B, which is the expensive part.
The value at the bottom, the total budgetary cost includes those hourly rates above, or those are kind of, I know they're ad hoc for extra stuff you hadn't considered because of the.
So those are what I've used to determine that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you've used those unit rates and other freight and things of that nature and equipment costs to come up with that budgetary value?
So that's just for our fees, the equipment and so on.
So that'll be in the whoever Purcell or X
That's
person
correct.
that does the work, okay?
That's correct.
but the value you're looking to have approved today is the total budgetary value at the bottom of.
Yes, and again, that will change once we know those two things that you mentioned.
There's no further questions. I move the paradigm, approve the paradigm proposal.
I'll second it. Okay. Any other questions on the paradigm proposal?
So, I guess I have, this is a conservative proposal then? In your mind, 250,000?
So I think it's a reasonable proposal. I'm not sure, again, which way, from a testing perspective, the EPA is going to lean. We're hoping through the use of the methods that we have, the data that we have, and then through some what I'll call composite testing, we can get the EPA to lighten their requirements. By regulation, TSCA says that we have to sample every 25 square feet. That budget does not include 2,500 samples. So it includes something somewhere between what I think is reasonable at 100 square feet, which would be a composite sample every 100 square feet, and that 2,500.
So not best case, not worst case,
Correct.
high moderate, mid moderate?
Mid-moderate.
Mid-moderate.
And we're hoping it'll be less than that, but again, trying to be reasonable for what the EPA would require.
Well, I think what's gonna end up happening, that's why I asked the question earlier, as we develop the plans and start physically doing work and discover what the actual scope of work is. I mean, right now, this is like trying to build a house without a design. I mean, we think we have an idea what a reasonable amount is, but then you get involved, oh, it's like 4 bathrooms, not 3. I don't think we really know what the scope is.
I think what we're hearing is if they come back and demand a 25-foot testing schedule, they'll be back in front of us telling us that we're gonna have to appropriate more money for testing.
Yes, that's correct.
And then some of the other labor costs associated with it.
I think to your point.
But
too,
at
probably
150
better
just for the
keep a
lab
gateway,
work, right?
we
That's
approve
correct.
this amount, you have to come back and
Yeah,
approve
there's
additional
now,
or
they
debate it.
up to 300 is the max or whatever.
Okay.
What's your experience working with EPA thus far? Got a good point person?
Yes, the Region 2 coordinator is very open to working and coming up with a solution. Some of the solutions that they had recommended previously, we really couldn't meet the time frame on. So they were talking about a 2-year time frame. But they said they are negotiable on the number of samples and not negotiable on some of the other.
We certainly got requirements.
Getting to the 1 ppm, they are not negotiable on. So that's, we know we have to do that. How we clear it, that's the negotiating portion.
So with the fact that if we were to choose to go with a 1-inch cap versus, will that influence the EPA?
No.
The only point that John brought up, it might be worthy, should we add a 10% contingency at the CEO's discretion, so we don't have to come back for, being 1% over this, because it's budgetary. So adding a small contingency might not be a terrible thing at this point, and then leave it up to staff to allow up to that amount, because that, I think, what John was getting at.
Yep.
Would that be in this, or would we just authorize Dave to authorize him in a separate action to make modifications to the contract?
I'm just saying, my only comment is just let's put a reasonable cap on it, so that we have to come back and discuss things at the board if we get into some more significant, like this EPA thing that you said, it doesn't sound like it's $5.
So
the change of 2,500, it sounds like it's multiples of 5, many multiples.
So Justin, would it be reasonable if the board wanted to approve this, including their motion allowing 10% discretion for the CEO, and then if it goes beyond that, we come back to the board for additional approval? Would that be?
I didn't hear you exactly. I apologize.
So would it be reasonable? We were talking about trying to put a cap on it. So the proposal now, the moderate is about 59,000. If the board wanted to say, okay, we'll approve this proposal, giving the CEO the discretion to go up to 10% more if needed, otherwise come back to the board for approval beyond that amount. Would that be a reasonable approach to this?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the overall budget, adding a 10% contingency makes sense. You're going to have other soft costs and other costs associated with getting into the contracts and monitoring them. So, I mean, legal, any other things, it's all within the budget that you're establishing for this project. Yeah, I imagine you're working within a capital budget for it overall. So adding that contingency will allow you to hold the line on the bid, but also have any contingency or margin to adjust for any, either field conditions or other soft costs.
Did we already have a motion?
Yeah, I'll amend
Yes.
my motion
Yes.
to include a 10% contingency fund at the discretion of the CEO.
Second that again.
All right. Any other discussion? On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Did we move on the BCA proposal?
Yes.
Yeah, you were,
Make a
you
comment.
were out.
Thanks.
Thank you both.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Go forth and solve our problem.
Do it in 16 things or less.
I have resolution number 0709 2021.02.
What's the project verification report you skipped over?
Oh, this was in,
Oh, that,
sorry.
okay.
this is,
Remember what it was?
yeah. This is, we typically report to you annually. All the projects that we've, were the pilots we had monitored, our local corporate based on job creation retention. And so part of our, well, just good governance and also reported by ADO is that we report to the board annually how those projects are shaping up. When you remember when they did the audit, one of the things that they commented on to us was that we should also be reporting to the board on the actual capital investments that network's supposed to be. We always collect that information. We just, in-house, so we got to document it. We're just reporting to you primarily on the job retention creation aspect. So we added that. So this year we made sure we asked for and reported to the capital investment from the project. So, the results, of course, made us realize when the results came in, we'll need to modify the questionnaire when we send it out for next year's reporting. Because some of the respondents put in the capital investment they made, which maybe the project finished, 3 years ago, but we're still monitoring the pilot. Pilot's still carrying forward. And, so we don't want to double report. We want to make it so language next year is more because what was the capital investment this past year? Project, so. But for the most part, you can see that, I think, our projects are, when they look at what the total FTEs were before the project, and current numbers, for the most part, are up. There's a couple where they've gone down, but we know some of the results of, particularly COVID and such. But I'm actually happy with some of the ones that have been, despite what we went through last year, so.
Board action.
No, just report for your information, yep.
Now I have resolution number 0709 2021.02 for 146 Arsenal Street disposal of fixed asset.
David probably should approve 03 first. It allows further disposal,
Okay.
and then the other is addressing the depreciation.
Right, now I have
It's like a revolving,
resolution number 0709 2021.03. It's a resolution for, let me read it. Disposal. Yeah, disposal for 146 Arsenal Street cubicle removal. Where staff has been working to get cubicles out of the building. We have donated many cubicles in a variety of businesses throughout the area. Unfortunately, within the current landscape of the office space and office furniture, there's little demand for cubicles. We have had local businesses, schools, not-for-profit, hospitals take some cubicles, but approximately 300 of the workstations remain. Whereas we requested 3 quotes from local contractors to remove the cubicles from the building and place them in dumpsters located in front of the building. Capital Construction is the lowest bidder quoted at $5,800. The 40-yard dumpster is $200 per dumpster. Hauling fee, and Dank has agreed to reduce the tipping fees of $31.50 per ton. Staff is currently working on additional savings to another vendor for hauling and tipping. Whereas we recommended authorization to spend up to $10,000 for the contractor and the dumpster and tipping fees. Therefore, it be resolved by the Board of Directors, Jefferson County Industrial Development Agency, that it hereby approves the request and yet further resolved that the chief executive officer or his designee are authorized to execute any and all documents necessary to carry out the purpose of this resolution. May I have a motion and second on this resolution?
Moved as presented.
Second. Questions? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries.
Thanks to Marshall for
Really nice.
getting rid of the community.
We got rid of about 50 units. We obviously had hoped that there would have been much higher demand, but
Still 300 more to get rid of?
Yep.
Resolution number 0709-2021.02 for 146 Arsenal Street disposal of fixed assets. Whereas during the 2014 renovation of 146 Arsenal Street building, JCIDA paid for several of the fixed assets listed below, and there's a spreadsheet, whereas the items have been depreciated since 6/1/14, and whereas since all the fixed assets will be disposed of by July 1, 2021, the CFO is requesting them to be removed from the balance sheet. And now therefore be it resolved, the Board of Directors, Jefferson County Industrial Agency, that it hereby approves the request, and it further be resolved, the Chief Executive Officer or his designate is hereby authorized and directed to execute any and all documents necessary to carry out this resolution. I entertain a motion and second on this resolution.
Move it as presented.
Second.
Questions?
Lyle, this is just book entry. This is not going to affect anything.
Will it
I mean, it'll affect assets.
It'll affect assets, depreciation, and expense. Anything that hasn't been expensed to depreciation now will go into a
Knowing
separate
that this is a
expense.
good year with the surplus, this is a good year to do these style of things.
And we have no choice.
Well, we don't have a choice, but it's also a good year, so
Yeah.
two things
Yes, it
aligned.
It is. It's a non-cash item, but
Yeah.
it will make our balance sheet and income statement look better.
On the motion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
This is a simple follow-up question on a similar vein. Again, since there's a surplus, are there other items, and do we have the flexibility of accelerating depreciation on other items that might, at your discretion, be worthwhile to discuss?
I don't know of any right now.
Okay, so there's not much else that
We
we
don't
can
have a
do.
whole lot of
Okay.
assets to
I
depreciate.
just wasn't sure. From time to time, there are some of those, but again, it's a good year to make those book entries and deal with it.
Well, if we dispose of anything that's already depreciated, that will come up.
But do we have flexibility to accelerate depreciation, or do we have to follow some other rule that you're just stuck with?
We pretty much have to follow the
Okay.
rules. If you adopt the policy early on, there are a lot of different methods of depreciation.
Yeah, okay, so we've
adopted
chosen a
streamlined-
route that you're just gonna stick with for
Streamlined
conformity.
depreciation.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. I'm going to read this resolution and not in its entirety, but.
Come on, read it all.
And then I'll ask for a motion in a second, and then we, for further discussion. So I have resolution number 0709-2021.04. The resolution of the Jefferson County Industrial Development Agency, the agency adopting amendments to its uniform tax exempt policy, UTEP. Entertain a motion in a second.
Yes.
For further discussion.
Second it
All right.
for further discussion.
The public hearing was held. It appears that we had 3 attendees. And our CEO asked for public comment, and there was no public comment.
We did receive a letter from Jim Burrows about it. It's not part of the public hearing, but it's part of the record.
Two of the towns are here today.
And we have two towns here today.
Dave also did a presentation in front of the Jefferson County Board of Legislators too, with additional comments.
Dave, you've gone through these public hearings and before the county.
Yeah, there were no comments at the public hearing we had. Actually, you'll see in the attendance, it was all school district representatives, just interested in what was going on. They didn't have any comment. There was no comment at the Board of Legislators. You do have a copy of the letter that was issued to Mr. Burrows. I haven't answered the letter yet because I figured I'd wait for the board discussion to answer on behalf of the board. The town heard concerns from those represented by Mr. Burrows. I think maybe some misunderstanding on his part, but we're not looking at limiting development in town. I think proof of that is the fact that we've already approved taxpayer projects for over a dozen solar projects in the county already, so.
Can you gentlemen hear Dave okay?
Can you hear him okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are approving projects throughout the county, and supporting that. We're doing energy development, so the board may have some thoughts on their own as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a huge misunderstanding on the language, on the host community agreement language. That came about because our goal is to represent every taxing jurisdiction. We just don't represent the town, the school, or the county. We want to represent it collectively. Anytime that there's an application for a tax abatement, it means that everybody is giving up taxing authority, including the school, the county, and the town. So what was concerning is there was one project where a town unilaterally negotiated a host agreement without the other taxing jurisdictions being involved in those negotiations. So we're not saying that there can't be a host community agreement, but if there's going to be a host community agreement, it has to be negotiated with all three parties in agreement to those terms.
Or separate from each, right? Like they could negotiate one with the school, one with the town, and well, the county won't, but.
Well,
one challenge.
When it's in front of us, we're representing all three taxing jurisdictions. Under section 487 of the real property tax law, that would allow the towns to negotiate privately with the developers separately. So if they're going to, my position is, as one of the board members, if they're going to negotiate for less than full taxation, it should be done collectively with all the parties at the table, so everyone knows what everyone is getting and giving up. Because if they're paying full taxation and they want to give your towns $1 million, I really don't care. But when they're paying less than full taxation, it's a decision that should be made collectively with all the affected taxing jurisdictions. So the language that we amended in the pilot agreement doesn't say you can't negotiate a host community agreement. It gives us latitude to say that if you're going to have a host community agreement, it's going to be approved by all the taxing jurisdictions, if one benefits differently than the others. Because currently, any pilot revenues are distributed on a pro rata basis. So if the town is 10% of the taxing liability in your town, you'll get 10% of whatever the pilot is. Okay, schools traditionally get the largest share of a pilot. So everything's distributed pro rata. So if you're 10% of the burden, the county's 30%, the school's 60%. If we get $10,000 in a pilot payment, your share of that $10,000 is 10% of it, okay? So if you want to negotiate something beyond that, I'm of the belief that that needs to be approved by all the taxing jurisdictions. Because they're giving up something so you can get more.
Could I provide a point of order or some backdrop on that clause that tracks into a few other UTEPs?
Absolutely.
Sorry to step on you. Just for backdrop, that clause in the UTEP that simply states that we'll take into account any host community agreements that may exist is a protective item for the IDA to reserve your discretion, which is what you're talking about. And also it takes into account potential changes to how your pilot might look, whether there is a host community agreement or if there's an absence of one. In the big picture, the host community agreements can generally take one of two forms or a combination of them. Oftentimes, and quite frankly, in my experience, the better version is an upfront payment, a one shot at the beginning at closing that is made either directly to the town at a closing, if you will, it could be with the IDA's closing, or paid at a time that's negotiated between the developer and the town. A commercial operation date is usually used in those contexts. The other version of a host community agreement is an annual payment structure. And again, this isn't a tax agreement. The HCAs have nothing to do with pilots, taxes, or otherwise. They're some cases voluntary, and other cases a mandatory payment enforced through either site plan or through a town permitting mechanism. Oftentimes they're buried in a decommissioning agreement. There's an upfront payment made to absorb municipal impacts for water, fire, sewer, whatever, and or decommissioning bonds. There's those decommissioning bonds that are on every project are in fact a payment made to the town in the form of a bond or a protective escrow agreement. In this particular case, or when the IDA is considering its uniform policy with respect to pilots, you've set up now a platform that provides a fixed dollar amount per megawatt AC with an escalator, in your case, reversing payments, to apply to all pilots associated with renewable energy projects. That's a uniform approach. That's the intent of the UTEP. In the case where a town in any particular instance requires an HCA that is just an upfront one shot, it's really no different than a building permit. You know, the towns collect hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes on a building permit, depending on the cost of a project. And that's outside our purview. We never see that stuff. If they happen to want to collect also an upfront HCA payment, that doesn't destabilize, impact, or otherwise interfere with the pilot. It's just upfront payment. It's like your pilot fee. The pilot fee that you collect at 2%, that doesn't interfere with or impact any distributions to the taxing jurisdictions. It's the HCAs that have recurring revenues annually that you really want to take into account. For example, if you're using a $5,500 per megawatt pilot plus land taxes, and the town is looking for $3,000 a year, escalating or not, it's obviously going to have an impact on the discussion. Because if the developer is saying, well, geez, with the pilot, which is $5,500, and now the town hitting me at $8,500 or $3,000 on top and an $8,500 annual going in rate, it's going to impact your discussion and how ultimately the combined distribution is measured out. In that particular instance, if the pilot were to be closed alone, as you mentioned, the town might get 10% of that $5,500 per megawatt, so $550. With this HCA structure that I just used as an example and an analogy, the town's going to end up something like more $3,500, and then the rest of the taxing jurisdictions would get distribution pro rata on the balance of the pilot. So it's just something to take into account, and most often and typically best deployed, like you said, you really want all the taxing jurisdictions kind of at the table with the IDA aligned with the developer as a form of a conversation and a platform, not necessarily the developer going to the town, then going to the school, going to the county, and then going to you and creating a bit of chaos. So the clause in the UTEP is included pretty much in all of the clients I've been assisting on this matter for several years. It gives you the right to step back and say, okay, because the town is charging more in a particular instance, and we tend to put aside the upfront payments because it doesn't affect the long-term pilot. But if there is a year-over-year HCA payment involved, it's going to change the dynamic of your discussion. And the developer is going to say, I'm going to not do this project if the town's getting me and the IDA's at a certain level. So you may end up with a pilot that goes in at 4,000 per megawatt, and the HCA is going to say what it's going to say. All this language does in the UTEP is provides you with discretion to look at the big picture and say, is everybody kind of coming out fair here? And it's an important clause to keep. I think at least one of the towns, their council, provided some comments with some concerns about the statement, but at the end of the day, it protects the town as well, because you're not locked into offering a pilot at the 5,500. You have discretion, and you're also protecting yourself to say, I don't really like how this looks in the big picture, so we're not even going to accept the application, which I think we've had an example like that in the not too distant past. So it gives you the ability to pause if you'd like to, or adjust how you're going into the pilot to reflect the big picture. That's kind of my 2 cents, and perhaps that provides a little bit of context on why that clause is included in the proposed UTEP.
And it is common, that is common language in IDAs across the state.
Yeah, without, you'd be a policy that says this is it. And if you have a concern about an HCA or how an HCA may be impacting your pilot discussion, you have the right to point to the UTEP and say, hey, listen, we need to take into account these things as a matter of policy, and we're going to adjust our pilot if we think it's appropriate, or perhaps not even consider one because we think there's an imbalance, or the parties haven't really gotten together, parties being your affected taxing jurisdictions that you have a bit of a fiduciary duty to protect, just as the board member mentioned. But also, you have discretion, and without that clause, you're kind of locked in. So taking into consideration HCAs gives you the flexibility you ultimately want to either take a pass or adjust things in a way that in the big picture makes sense. It's totally fine for towns to come in and require these kind of payments. Sometimes they'll do it in a fashion that kind of has you scratching your head, whether it's born out of a site plan that might look like an extraction, or if it hits a town board in the context of a building permit or a variance or a zoning consideration. Better done. It's really at the town board level in the big picture at the building permit level, as opposed to having it buried in a site plan or a planning commission or board level. Those get a little weird. In all events, the IDA is going to reserve its rights to listen, see how the conversation is going with developer and taxing jurisdictions, and make adjustments as necessary. Ideally, in a perfect world, there never is one, but the IDA is the one-stop shop that's going to be doing these pilots. If there are HCAs out in the community, they're going to have diverse expectations. Not every town is the same. This clause in the UTEP allows you to be flexible and tap out or hit pause if things look imbalanced, or to the extent that things look fairly balanced, you have the ability to be flexible and adjust your pilot in a way that kind of balances trade. What I would try to avoid or kind of shy away from are instances where, and that's why I stepped in a little bit, where you say, well, we're going to go out to the taxing jurisdictions and get their consents for a distribution. I wouldn't subject yourself to that spanking machine, if you will, or that process where you're going out and treating it like the old days, like everything's a deviation and expecting an approval before you can move ahead. I would instead try to rely on your flexible policy without having to ask for permission in any particular event. You just have the discretion to tailor your pilots and moving forward on any particular pilot only when you're comfortable in doing so.
Justin, I have a quick question of you, but first, we should probably introduce Justin. Justin is with Harris Beach, the law firm we go to on retainer a lot for some of these issues. They work out of Albany. They work with a lot of IDAs around the rest of the state. They're our go-to law firm. He has a lot of experience dealing with taxation and UTEPs all across New York State in conjunction with New York State government. So he keeps us on a higher playing field with knowledge.
My question to you, Justin, is with what you just said, do you feel confident addressing a letter to Justin Burrows, answering his concerns?
Absolutely. If the board wants to reply either through adoption of the policy, and we're in minutes right now, this is, a public response. The UTEP is tailored in such a fashion that the IDA is retaining discretion in all events, and also taking into account and deferring to local home rule. In any event, an HCA, a host community agreement, is a municipality speaking through policy. We're going to respect that. The statement that will take into account the use or existence of any HCA is as much of a reservation of discretion on your part as it is respecting their local home rule preferences. We're just going to try to adapt our pilots and go in and facilitate economic development and renewable energy projects as best we can, but we have the ability to right size or take into account those factors, which primarily are financial. If a town's coming in and demanding $10,000 a megawatt, puts you in a really tough spot. So you can hit pause and say, well, geez, let's look at the big picture. And if town, it makes sense to, instead of asking for $10,000 a year or $10,000 per megawatt per year over 15 years, would it make more sense to have an upfront HCA that doesn't necessarily impact the pilot discussion that we're having as a collection of taxing jurisdictions and IDA? There's ways to get there, and typically that's best done through really close coordination with Dave and staff and representatives of the taxing jurisdictions, shoulder to shoulder, talking about a project, and then collectively engaging with the developer. And I'm not doing this in a necessarily negative way, but you've all seen how the 487 conversations can go and how it's completely chaotic. There's even oddball donation agreements going on. I won't go down that rabbit hole right now. I don't understand it. But what it does is it puts the IDA in a real hamstrung position as a facilitator to help these projects when you have these chaotic conversations going on. The best way to really organize and deploy uniform economic development by the IDA and having a partnership with your taxing jurisdictions is to really link up the taxing jurisdictions and the IDA to face the developers and work with them in a collaborative way to come to the best result. So if I were to respond or help with the communication with that representative who contacted you on behalf of a taxing jurisdiction, the overarching response and theme is this is put in there to help them too. And we want to be a partner with them, end up with the best looking HCA that fits their local home rule.
I think, does it even require a response? It's an opinion, really.
Yeah, but I think that, this letter came attention, Dave. I think it either should come from him or myself or him and I, and Justin can.
That's right.
Help tweak it.
Right, I think it should be addressed because we are gonna hear this argument. The solar projects are coming out of the gate with host community agreements. And it's gonna be an issue on the table, and it's before us, the misunderstanding somewhat of our role and how we play it. We need to clarify it.
Yeah, and I think too, and maybe the letter back to the girls comes from you as sheriff, but I think we can also send a letter to the taxpayers to explain, this is not saying no, but it's saying we consider one way or the other, positive or negative.
But what Justin just said, it has to be done cooperatively, and that's the problem we had with the one situation where it was done unilaterally. And that's where the problem arises. If there's gonna be an HCA, I think it's important that everyone sees what's on the table before we commit to it. And I have one last question. Another comment was raised, a question was raised by a county legislator today about protecting for road damage. We have a project agreement that follows the pilot, correct?
We can't have.
Can we put road damage indemnification into a project agreement following a pilot approval?
Generally, those matter, and again, those matters are most typically born out of site plan approvals by local planning board, town board. Sometimes there isn't a local planning board, and sometimes there isn't a local town code that deals with these things. And in those instances, these projects and the developers sometimes can just go to the town building inspector and pull a permit. It's really remarkable in some really rural locations where there's no site plan controls, but where there are some, a planning board or a town board that controls through code provisions, those impact considerations are generally spoken to and through the site plan approval, where they have berming, vegetation, screening, and how the site is going to sit, whether it's going to be avoiding wetlands, how they may deal with roadway impacts. And quite frankly, an upfront HCA payment, that's one of the bases for it. Are they going to wreck a road? If so, they're going to make a compensation payment to the town for any kind of reconstruction or addressing any impacts that the project may bear. That's really the basis for those things.
Justin, a lot of towns do or don't have agreements with, say, the state or the county to maintain roads, because a number of these projects are on county or state roads, but they're in town purview with regards to site plan. So like, I know the town I live in, we don't have the ability to maintain the state road. We've got to have an agreement with New York State. And we actually approved a project on New York State Route 178. So I don't think the town I live in addressed if the road got damaged or not, but that would be a state concern. So there are, I think to your point, there's a lot of gray areas with regards to who's got the ball. And that's where the county probably.
And the real problem comes with everyone fast tracking seeker on these projects and not taking a hard look at all these. So you get a negative declaration on the impacts, and then you try to negotiate payments to mitigate impacts that you haven't addressed in the environmental review. So, but I think you clarified a lot for everybody that this isn't a yes or, you do an HCA, it's a no. It's that it gives latitude both ways on projects.
Mr. Chairman, since we had a couple guests that asked questions, and we said we would discuss this, would it be out of place to see if they have additional questions, or was this clarified? Is that okay to ask that?
My question would be the negotiation for the pilot program and having everybody involved, the applicant for the wind energy. The letter that you sent here was that it addresses renewable energy projects under 20 megawatt. Now, does that mean anybody above the 20 megawatt wouldn't have that negotiation yet?
Well, so our UTEP, which is our uniform, the idea behind the uniform text is to take a uniform approach to all these pilots that we're doing across the county. So anything that's outside of that is what we call a deviation, which would need the approval of all the affected taxing jurisdictions. So right now, our pilot is looking at under 20 megawatts. Because if they're over 20 megawatts, they have the option to going to the state, which is reviewed not by the local planning board, but by the state process. And if they're 25 or above, they're mandatory to go through the state process. So if something came to us that was over 20 megawatts, we would have to come up with, that's not within our UTEP. So that would be a deviation, at which point we would be negotiating a pilot abatement, a pilot structure. We would need the approval of each of the taxing jurisdictions to proceed with that.
Just to clarify, that would apply to any style of project, not just renewable.
Right.
So something that doesn't fit, like if somebody wanted to come to us for a hotel and we didn't normally grant proceeds for hotels, it could be considered as a deviation. So the 20 megawatt threshold was what we decided that was 20 megawatt and less, or the style of projects that seem to be populating the county. And it aligned more with state regulations where different approval agencies might not involve town, because this 94C that your town of work may be familiar with is 20 megawatt or less. Above 20 megawatt, the state may have the approval process. So it affects everything, including renewable. So we wanted to clarify, this isn't just about renewable energy. If somebody wants to build a hotel, we don't normally grant those proceeds. Come to us with a deviation, and maybe a very good reason we would want to grant a pilot.
So if we're doing, if you read the earlier passage on the manufacturing project, so we typically will provide a 15-year pilot that would give the manufacturer, say, new manufacturing facility, a 50% discount averaged out over that 15-year period. You might change the payment schedule within that period, percentages, whatever, it would still be equivalent to 50% over 15 years. If we have a large project coming in with much more benefit to the county and the region, we may go beyond 15 years for the pilot, but in that case, it would be a deviation, so we would have to get, again, the tax jurisdiction approval, because we're doing them outside our normal.
So realistically, Dave, it's just one extra step?
Yes.
Is that the simple way of saying it?
But the concerning trend though, and coming to your question of the 20 megawatts, it appears from things we're seeing from the state, anything over 20 megawatts, there may be taking all the local input right out of the equation.
They wouldn't go in front of the town planning board over 20 megawatts if they choose to use the state approval process. Like the project that's been proposed in Rutland, the top of the hill, that project doesn't go through local zoning. That project be approved by the state.
And they're now indicating that they probably gonna negotiate the pilot at that outside of our jurisdiction.
It just may not involve.
Well, they aren't gonna negotiate the pilot. They can establish an HCA.
Right.
But not the pilot. And the question becomes, and Justin gone?
No, he's there.
He's still there.
Have you heard anything on the state's efforts to establish the uniform appraisal methodology yet? Is there anything coming back?
I haven't seen any updates. I know they're, in typical fashion, supposed to form a committee who's going to make recommendations to be considered and then deployed. So
that could affect our discussions, you know, depending on what they do. Maybe we're out of the business and maybe they're just going to pay full taxation.
There's a couple of things there to keep an eye on. Number one, it could be 12 to 18 months before those things actually become defined and then put into effect, which would then go into effect as of the next relevant tax status dates for appraiser or assessors to pay attention to or adhere to. So if we're seeing this in 2023, I'd be shocked. That being said, the most likely impact, because of the way it was drafted, is that the assessment of these assets is going to be significantly reduced or curtailed. I don't know what the word is, but they're going to be valued at a discounted cash basis, not on a cost or sale or capital expense basis. There's been a range of $500,000 a megawatt on the low end to $1 million, $1.5 million, and even I've seen some projects get hit at $2 million a megawatt, which is way out of range. The net effect of this on a discount to cash basis is going to result in a number of things. I'm going to presume that the smaller community-based solar under a megawatt may not even want to go for a 487 pilot or an IDA pilot. What's the use? What's the value there? Given the chaos, especially with 487 pilots. So the lower end of projects may not be a throughput or pipeline projects that you're going to see anymore, which is probably okay. The 3, 5, and 10s are certainly going to want the continued predictability. There may be some pressure put on the $5,500 mark at some point once we get a sense of how the industry absorbs the new assessments. So there's going to be some continuing policy hits that we're going to see in the next 18 to 24 months as we look at this thing. There's also, importantly, potentially going to be an impact on pilots that were put in place. You may have some developers that come back and say, I want to change it and pay less, in which case you'd say, geez, a deal's a deal. You may see some smaller pilots that were closed in the early days, just the developer saying, if I pay full taxes, it's going to be about the same thing, so I don't want to terminate. Which in your case would be like, geez, that's great. It's one less project to report on Paris, so here's your termination docs. And that by extension is going to displace or to a certain extent impact host community agreements that have already been deployed on a per megawatt basis. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of deals that get terminated and some weird discussions with towns between developers and towns on those HCAs if they want to back away from those obligations. So it's going to be positive in some ways and disruptive in others. I guess we're kind of laying back and waiting to see how the committee churns out the regs and how that assessment standard is put in place.
We just saw an appraisal for a proposed project that kind of blows my mind. It's even higher than the last one we had. It more than justifies where we are.
An appraisal or an assessment that came out of a.
An appraisal that was submitted as part of a.
Yeah, there's another solar project, I can't remember the name of the company, a newer one, I may have sent to you, Justin.
And it was done on a discounted cash flow basis, but.
They have not submitted an application yet. They were just sending us their appraisal, knowing what our policy was, trying to justify saying we would like to, ask for a lower per megawatt fee. But the appraisal they sent us did not support.
Just undermine their position completely.
We can afford 6,000.
So it all depends how the state establishes, but they were using a power purchase agreement type scenario. And my concern on these large ones is that if they pick the zone wholesale price, it's going to plummet the value estimations. So if you go from 9 cents a kilowatt hour in the PPA scenario to 2.5 cents in a utility scale, it's going to have it, and it may not even be worth considering a pilot at that time.
Other questions?
Yeah. It kind of starts and stops with the assessor, whatever they hang on the project, and that's what you're abating. That's kind of the nature of the beast.
Did we further confuse you? You got more questions?
I just want to close with this. I realize possibly you won't take out that section under the draft new property tax abatement pay and number under number 20 and number 2B. I take it that's going to remain in the draft. If you would consider tabling this for further answer from Mr. Burrows or any other people might want to have comments on this issue.
I don't see any reason to table at this point. We've had, letters gone to all tax jurisdictions. We've had public hearing, plenty of opportunity for comment. I think we'll address Mr. Burrow's letter, explain that the way he's interpreting this is not the way that it's meant. As Mr. Miller explained, it protects the towns as well as the IDA's interest. And it's not saying yes or no, it's saying we take into account.
If Town of Worth has a project and you want to host community agreement, what we describe to you, just come to us as a deviation. You can still come to the IDA, but it's under a deviation that has more scrutiny. That's all this is. You don't get the standard treatment, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but we don't have to go out to the school and the town and the county but you can come for a project. Well, not you, but the applicant. So you have another mechanism. It's not taking it away. It's just saying we have to treat it a little differently. Because like if in a normal project, Town of Worth gets 15% of the tax and the county gets 35 and the school gets the rest, as our attorney explained, if all of a sudden you get 50% and the school gets 30 and the county gets 10, guess what? Your partners are a little maybe upset.
Right.
That's all this is trying to prevent.
Okay.
It's probably the easiest way we can describe it.
We don't want to get in a.
That's fair. There's not a lot of school kids sitting on these solar panels. So
Yeah. Now, if we were playing poker, I just want to take the chip in front of you. You'd let me do that, right?
The towns bear the brunt of these things generally. I mean, there's outliers. Say there could be a state road or something like that, but generally the towns sit on these things and have to babysit them and make sure that they're not going to go out and buy golden fire trucks or anything like that. But the town generally has the measurable impacts to identify for public safety and decommissioning concerns. So, in the big picture, if your pilot's showing $5,500 and the town is showing $2,500 in their HCA and there's 8,000 on the table, and the town happens to be getting out of that picture, 3,000 or 4,000 of it, I personally don't see an issue. The 5,500 is going out pro rata because that's what the IDA law says. The town is getting its portion of the pilot, which is de minimis, but they have the impacts. The school's getting what in the normal course is probably a disparate portion of the pilot because of their tax base and their mill rate. But again, they're not providing any services or have any costs associated with these things. So it's kind of found money. And those are the big, way 50,000 foot discussions that kind of guide these things throughout the state, that kind of help there might be some friction between the town and the school, where the school's saying, well, the town's getting more than usual. But in these particular cases, the town is bearing, a disparate amount of the impacts, and perhaps that makes sense.
And I'll just add, since we do have two representatives from towns here, we are also working with the Tug Hill Commission that you're familiar with, to try to co-sponsor a workshop this fall on the renewable energy assessment, kind of better understand them and how they work and such. But also to point out to you, I have heard in the past some concerns from town board members or supervisors that where you're given this big break on the taxes to the solar projects. I don't get that kind of break, but also to point out that one, these are payments that are new that you're not receiving now, so additional money to the town. But again, the pilot that we're providing, these tax breaks are only to the solar project itself. In many cases, they're leasing the land on which the project is. This is not an abatement. So the land underlying the lease, underneath that project, is not getting a tax break. And in many cases, the assessed value of that property now goes up. The assessor look at it and say, okay, that's not vacant farmland anymore. That's generating revenue. We're going to assess that at a higher value. So the towns are still going to see increased taxation from that, as well as the pilot payment, because the land value is going to go up underneath the project.
Thank you.
Okay, much more to discuss?
I guess, our concern in the town of Rutland is we don't feel that, with a pilot program, we would get the revenue that would take. You take like on an $8 million project, we may get $500-600 a year off that project. That's almost nothing compared to $8 million investment. That's just an example, And like we said, the schools, they get a bigger share, and yet the town's property, is somebody's going to drive down by there and look at a bunch of black things. It's not very appealing to the average person. But yet we're taking a hit on a smaller funding, small amount of money that we're receiving. That's why I guess we're kind of opposed to the pilot program.
Would you like to see them assessed at full value?
Well, it depends on whether it would stick the whole program out or not, but I think that would be the solution. But on the other hand, you hate to lose it. But if these agencies are getting federal and state money to put these programs in, they're going to go forward with them anyway, whether they get a tax break or not.
Well, that's partly the reason the county has taken the position that anything over 20 megawatts, the county wants to see them assessed at full value.
Yeah. So why in a smaller project, under 20 megawatts, why should they get the tax breaks? The same as the higher ones.
But even at 100%, your example of $550 tax, now you're going to get $1,000, and does it still offset? It is additional revenue.
Right. It may not.
And again, the value of the land, that the project sits on is going to go up in value, which is going to increase taxes as well.
Well, that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Last time.
I will reiterate though, when you evaluate all those 20 megawatts, community solar projects, and there's a couple of commercial ones coming down the road that are substantial. When you add up, we're keeping a running tally here in the agency of additional tax revenue that all taxing jurisdictions are saying. It's significant. There's significant tax dollars that county and towns and school districts are, when you add them all up, due to solar development. It's nothing to shake a stick at. It's significant. It's an opportunity. It's done right.
Alrighty, on the resolution, roll call vote, please.
Ron,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Resolution carries.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Might be night. It's dinner time now.
Go up to shiny spot here.
Look, page 99. We have a resolution, but I think at this time I entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss the proposed acquisition, sale, or lease of real property.
So
Second.
Where are we keeping?
We would invite the LDC members, staff, and council. On the motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. We're now in executive session.
Anyone need a water while I'm getting up? Okay.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, there's no bourbon. I heard somebody say that, but.
Not till after lunch.
Well, it's lunch somewhere.
It's probably that one.
It's lunch somewhere.
Dave, what I anticipate is, finish discussion here, Harry's here, we can call him in, we want to talk about the project, but then I'll go back to the executive session again after he's done discussing anything else. Well, at some point, Harry will, there's a certain amount of information he'll share with us here. At one point, we may want to go to executive session with Harry to discuss some of the proprietary strategies that he doesn't want competitors to be aware of. So,
Can we bring him in? Well, let's
ask our questions.
Ask our questions and then bring Harry into executive session for that discussion, and then because it's all.
We probably ought to have the, probably ought to at least have some discussion with Harry in the public session.
Yeah, no, we will, once we come out of the executive.
Looks like they've been scarifying the floor here.
That's where we did the testing.
Okay, let's get started.
Okay, so, we have the, resolution we're going to be, considering today, two resolutions, actually. One, the initial preliminary, initial project resolution on the, pilot application for Conval Manufacturing, which is a subsidiary of Conval Energy. Conval Energy is the, company with whom we'll be doing the land development agreement for the transfer once everything is in place, site plan approvals, all that stuff.
And for my clarity, none of this has anything to do with DigiCollect. That's not on this parcel of land, not in these projects. That was a prior, that was a question I asked.
Supposed to get this one done first, then we'll turn our attention to that.
That takes away 5 questions that I had.
Once that project is kind of brought into a little more clarity and crystallizes, I would presume that the trajectory of DigiCollect, which is going to look like this, and it won't be as complicated as 88 acres getting whacked up in the future. It'll be just DigiCollect on the 12 over on the west parcel.
So this 88 is separate from the parcel of land DigiCollect may sit on.
And actually, by the time we close, it'll be a little bit less than 88 because there's about 3.38 acres up in the northwest corner. That's in the runway protection zone that we cannot build